Deep within the Virginia State Archives, hidden beneath centuries of bureaucratic records, lies a collection of documents authorities tried to bury for more than 200 years. Inside are 23 witness testimonies, 14 coroner's reports describing deaths so brutal they seemed beyond human explanation, and one blood-stained journal belonging to a woman whose very name became a curse, whispered across Henrico County. The year was 1801, and Kate Bender had begun what locals would later call the hunting season that never ended. What makes these papers especially terrifying is not only their gruesome detail, but the cold precision with which they document a reign of terror, one that claimed the lives of at least 37 escaped slaves in just 18 months. Even more chilling is how close this nightmare came to being erased from history altogether. Before we step into the darkness of Kate Bender's story and the horrors that consumed the forests of Henrico County, know this. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the darkest, most meticulously researched mysteries that others dare not tell. If you're brave enough to face them, subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And tell me, where are you listening from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. Now, let's travel back to Virginia, 1801. To a time when vengeance, paranoia, and blood would transform a woman into something far worse than folklore's monsters. The discovery of these records in 1987 sent shockwaves through academic circles, but their contents were deemed too sensitive for public release. What you're about to hear comes from those sealed archives, survivor statements, and court testimonies that together reveal a portrait of evil so methodical it reshapes our understanding of the Underground Railroad era. Richmond in 1801 was a city on the brink of chaos. The failed slave rebellion of Gabriel Prosser the previous summer had left the region trembling with fear. Plantation owners slept with loaded muskets at their bedsides. Enslaved men and women disappeared into the night in record numbers, seeking freedom along the perilous paths of the Underground Railroad. Henrico County, just beyond Richmond's booming tobacco markets, was a labyrinth of plantations, dirt roads, and swampy forests. It had become a vital corridor for fugitives seeking passage north to Pennsylvania. Conductors on the Underground Railroad mapped secret routes through those very woods, the same wilderness that soon became Kate Bender's hunting ground. Kate Bender was not a woman one could forget. Nearly 6 feet tall, with shoulders broader than most men and arms like oak branches, she carried herself with a physical dominance that silenced entire rooms. Witnesses later swore she could crush walnuts in her palm and bend iron horseshoes with ease. But her most unsettling feature was her eyes, pale gray, unblinking, calculating, as though she were forever seeing something others could not. Born Catherine Elizabeth Hartwell in 1765, the daughter of tenant farmers in Virginia's Piedmont, Kate grew up hardened by poverty and relentless field labor. Survival demanded strength, and she learned early to wield it without hesitation. By her teenage years, she was feared locally for her temper and admired, or dreaded, for her willingness to settle disputes with her fists. In 1789, she married Thomas Bender, a plantation overseer notorious even by the brutal standards of his time. Thomas was not a large man, barely 5'8", but his cruelty was legend. He carried a whip studded with iron and delighted in inventing punishments that crushed the spirit as effectively as the body. Kate did not recoil from his savagery. She seemed drawn to it, often watching his torments with quiet fascination. Together they ruled their 200-acre plantation along the Chickahominy River with terror. Nearly 40 enslaved workers lived under their domination, enduring whippings, forced separations, and constant surveillance. Kate's cruelty within the household was so severe that some slaves chose death over her daily punishments. Their marriage, like their plantation, was built on violence. Neighbors spoke of midnight screams, smashed furniture, and ferocious arguments echoing across the fields. Yet Thomas and Kate clung to each other with fierce devotion. He saw in her a partner who matched his appetite for domination. She saw in him the only man who embraced the darkness inside her. The couple bore no children, a fact that neighbors blamed on Kate's unnatural size and temperament. Dr. Samuel Richardson, who occasionally tended the plantation, wrote in his private journal that Kate's body was built more like a draft animal than a woman's, and that she lacked the capacity for normal human affection. His words, written years before the nightmare to come, would prove prophetic. By 1800, the Bender plantation was already a place of whispered dread. Tales spread of slaves beaten to death for the smallest infractions, of Kate's cold smile as she watched families torn apart, of her towering figure haunting the punishment grounds. Escape attempts were rare, and even those who tried rarely succeeded. Thomas's skill as a tracker and Kate's knowledge of the forests made flight nearly impossible. It was during this rising tension that whispers of Gabriel Prosser's rebellion began to spread. Thomas Bender was recruited as one of the county's chief overseers in preparing a defense. He relished the task, leading patrols, interrogating suspects, and devising methods of suppression. Kate often accompanied him on these midnight hunts, moving her massive frame with eerie stealth through the darkened woods. For Kate, these patrols awakened something primal, a predator's instinct long buried beneath the veneer of domestic brutality. And when Gabriel's rebellion failed in August 1800, betrayed by informants and broken by a sudden storm, the executions that followed only deepened the climate of fear. Heads of rebels were mounted on pikes as grim warnings, and plantation owners tightened their grip on those still enslaved. In this atmosphere of dread and repression, Thomas Bender made a decision that would seal his fate and unleash the full horror of his wife's true nature upon the world. The morning of October 15th, 1800 broke gray and bitterly cold, the wind carrying with it the scent of dying leaves drifting through the forests of Henrico County. Thomas Bender had received word that a small band of escaped slaves was moving north through the area, hoping to reach freedom. According to informants, the group consisted of 5 men and 2 women who had fled plantations further south, following the winding course of the Chickahominy River. Thomas quickly assembled a hunting party, himself, 2 neighboring overseers, Samuel Clark and William Pattison, and 4 hounds bred for one specific purpose, tracking human beings. Kate demanded to join them. At first, Thomas dismissed her, saying that chasing fugitives was men's work. But her insistence wore him down. She armed herself with a heavy oak club and joined the hunt with a fervor that unsettled even the hardened men beside her. Before dawn, the party set out, dogs straining at their leashes, noses pressed to the riverbank earth. Kate, despite her massive frame, moved with eerie agility through the undergrowth, her pale gray eyes darting across broken branches and footprints. She seemed thrilled by the pursuit, often pushing ahead, calling back when she spotted signs the others had missed. By midday, the hounds grew frantic. Their quarry was close. Thomas estimated they were less than an hour behind. Kate's excitement grew palpable, her breathing heavy, her movements sharp and predatory. The fugitives were finally discovered in a clearing beside a creek. Exhausted, unaware of the danger closing in, they shared their last scraps of food. The hunters emerged from the trees, surrounding them. Among the 7 was a boy barely in his teens and an older woman with gray hair. Witness testimonies differ, but Samuel Clark's later account provides one version. According to him, Thomas ordered the fugitives to surrender and return to their plantations. Joshua, the eldest, a preacher on his home estate, stepped forward and pleaded he would go back if the others were allowed to continue north. Thomas's reply was merciless. He lashed Joshua across the face with his iron-studded whip, leaving a gash that poured blood. The act ignited the resistance. The younger men surged forward to defend their leader, while the women and boy fled into the woods. In the confusion, Thomas became separated, chasing two of the younger men toward the creek. Hours later, he was found floating face down in shallow water, his skull caved in by what appeared to be a heavy stone. That was the official record, the one preserved in the Henrico County courthouse. But Kate's private journal, discovered decades later, tells another tale. In her jagged handwriting, she described watching from a distance as the two slaves turned on Thomas, bludgeoning him to death with rocks torn from the creek bed. She claimed she was frozen in horror. Yet investigators who reviewed her account centuries later questioned its truth. Did Kate truly stand by and watch? Or did she play a more active role in her husband's brutal end? No one could ever prove it. What is certain is this. When Samuel Clark and William Patterson reached the creek, Thomas lay lifeless and Kate was kneeling beside him. Witnesses described her massive body trembling, not only with grief but with something darker, something unreadable. The two fugitives who supposedly killed Thomas vanished into the forests, never to be caught. Thomas Bender's funeral was a spectacle. Nearly every plantation owner in the county attended, treating his death as a dangerous omen. That slaves had killed a white overseer and escaped was intolerable. Calls rang out for stricter patrols, harsher punishments, and tighter control. Kate sat silent through it all, her face cold, her voice flat when neighbors offered condolences. Dr. Samuel Richardson later wrote in his journals that her composure disturbed him deeply. She shed no tears, spoke to no one, and instead studied the mourners with the same calculating gaze she once used to watch punishments on her plantation. In the weeks after the burial, Kate withdrew. She dismissed most of her slaves, keeping only a few for basic upkeep. More and more she vanished into the surrounding woods, moving alone for hours. Neighbors who glimpsed her there said she seemed to be mapping every creek, every tree, every path, memorizing the wilderness itself. By December, she was a ghost within the community. The Bender house stood dark, a place neighbors avoided. Local merchants noted her unusual purchases, coils of rope, heavy snares meant for trapping large animals, and tools whose purpose no one could quite identify. This was the winter Kate transformed. Her isolation was not grief, it was preparation. Piece by piece, she shed the skin of a widow and forged herself into a predator. By spring of 1801, the transformation was complete. On March 23rd, she struck for the first time. Her victim was a young man named Samuel, who had escaped from a plantation 40 miles south, following the Chickahominy River toward freedom. His body would not be found until nearly a week later. Samuel's body was discovered hanging from a massive oak tree 2 miles from the Bender property. A noose of rough hemp rope circled his neck. But what made the scene truly horrifying was not the hanging itself. It was the condition of the corpse. His wrists had been bound tightly behind his back with leather straps. His clothing was torn, marked by evidence of a long, violent struggle through thick undergrowth. Most chilling of all were the impressions around his throat, signs that he had first been strangled by hand, as if his killer had wanted to ensure death through more than one method. Constable James Whitfield led a perfunctory investigation. His official conclusion was that Samuel had taken his own life in despair after his failed escape. But those who saw the body knew better. Nothing about the scene resembled suicide. Still, authorities refused to entertain the alternative. Acknowledging murder would mean investigating a white perpetrator. The case was closed within 2 weeks. Samuel was buried in an unmarked grave in Potter's Field. His story quietly erased. Yet for those who understood the signs, Samuel's death was only the beginning. Kate had spent the long winter methodically studying the routes used by escaping slaves, learning their patterns with the same precision Thomas once applied to crushing rebellion. She knew fugitives clung to waterways, streams made tracking by dogs difficult, and the Chickahominy River formed a natural passage through the forests of Henrico County. She mapped every bend, sandbar, and hiding place along its length, She learned to spot the faintest traces of human movement: broken twigs, disturbed leaves, threads of cloth snagged on thorns. More importantly, she began to understand the psychology of desperation, where the weary would seek shelter, how fear dictated their choices, and the blind hope that often betrayed them. Her second victim was Rebecca. She had been traveling with companions when a thunderstorm scattered them. Alone, terrified, she stumbled into an abandoned tobacco barn. Believing it to be safe, she lay down in a corner to rest until dawn. Kate found her there. Instead of killing Rebecca immediately, Kate chose cruelty. She bound her and spent hours describing in graphic detail exactly what she planned to do. Her journal later revealed that she savored the moment. The slow unraveling of hope, the despair reflected in Rebecca's eyes. She wrote of fear as though it were a kind of beauty, a balance for her husband's death. Rebecca's body was discovered 3 days later, strangled with her own clothing, propped upright against a tree. It was not just murder, and it was theater. Kate had staged the body to be found, a message carved into the very landscape: no one was safe. This time, Constable Whitfield could not call it suicide. The staging was undeniable. But once again, society's blinders prevailed. Instead of confronting the possibility of a white killer, Whitfield suggested that Rebecca had been murdered by other slaves. Punishment, perhaps, for betrayal or infighting among fugitives. The theory soothed white anxieties and deflected attention from the darker truth. The case remained technically open, but no serious investigation followed. Meanwhile, Kate was already preparing for the next hunt. Rebecca's death had taught her valuable lessons: how to choose isolated locations, how to dispose of evidence, and how to savor the psychological domination of her prey. She realized her capacity for cruelty not only rivaled her husband's, but exceeded it, and she found the discovery intoxicating. Spring turned to summer, and Kate's killings escalated. Her third victim was Marcus, a teenage boy from Chesterfield County. For 3 days she tracked him through the forest, watching, learning, biding her time. Finally, she cornered him at a creek. Unlike Rebecca, Marcus fought back. Young, strong, desperate. He struck her again and again, leaving bruises across her massive frame. But Kate was stronger. She overpowered him, forcing him to the ground and crushing the life from him with her bare hands. Her journal described the kill in disturbing detail, almost erotic in tone. She wrote of the moment his eyes rolled back, the moment his body went slack, as the most exhilarating of her life. When Marcus's body was found, it was hanging 20 feet above the ground in a tree. The sheer effort required to hoist a body that high sent a clear message. This was not just murder, it was demonstration. A predator was at work in Henrico County. By now, even the most willfully blind could see the pattern. 3 murders in 2 months. 3 escaped slaves, each killed with unmistakable brutality, each victim overpowered by someone of immense physical strength. Under pressure from local plantation owners, Constable Whitfield finally admitted what had become undeniable. A killer was stalking Henrico County. But admitting the problem and solving it were 2 very different things. Kate had become a master predator. She could move silently through the forest, leave no trace of her passage, and predict with unnerving accuracy where fugitives would rest, drink, or hide. And in public, she remained the grieving widow, quiet, withdrawn, carrying herself with the air of a woman broken by loss. No one could have imagined that behind that mask, Kate Bender was already planning her next kill. Kate Bender lived 2 lives. By day, she attended church services, nodded politely to neighbors who inquired about her well-being, and handled business transactions with the same cold efficiency she always had. To the community, she appeared unchanged since Thomas's death, a grieving widow managing her affairs with stoic composure. No one imagined that the quiet woman in the 3rd pew of Henrico Methodist Church each Sunday was the same predator who spent her nights stalking human prey in the forests. Her ability to compartmentalize was extraordinary. Kate had perfected the art of splitting herself into 2 distinct identities: the respectable widow and the relentless killer. This psychological transformation, the dual existence she maintained, was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all. She built an inner narrative that justified her actions. In her mind, each escaped slave she hunted down was an act of righteous justice, balancing the scales for her husband's death and restoring an order she believed had been broken. Kate wasn't killing from passion or rage. She was killing with ritual, with conviction, convinced she was serving a higher moral purpose. That belief stripped away the normal barriers of conscience and made her unimaginably dangerous. By the summer of 1801, Kate had become something beyond an ordinary criminal. She was a predator who had found her true environment, and the forests of Henrico County were her hunting ground. Every fugitive who entered that wilderness unknowingly stepped into her domain. Her methods had become terrifyingly efficient. She divided the forests into overlapping patrol territories, rotating between them with military-like precision. She constructed hidden observation posts stocked with supplies, allowing her to remain concealed for days as she studied her prey. Her skill at reading the land had become uncanny. From a snapped twig or disturbed leaves, she could tell not only the direction of travel, but also the size, strength, and condition of those who had passed. She understood her victims with chilling accuracy. Most fugitives traveled by night, sought water by day, and clung to the densest cover they could find. Families slowed one another down. Groups scattered when pursued but always tried to reunite. The weakest would be protected, even at the risk of the others. Lone travelers would take reckless chances. Kate knew these instincts, and she learned to weaponize them. Her fourth confirmed victims were Isaiah, his pregnant wife Sarah, and their 8-year-old son David. They had been on the run nearly a week when Kate spotted them by a stream 3 miles from her property. Instead of striking immediately, she watched them for 2 days, identifying their vulnerabilities. Sarah's pregnancy was slowing them down. David was sick. Isaiah grew increasingly desperate as his family faltered. They were trapped between the impossibility of moving forward and the certainty of capture if they stayed too long. Kate exploited their desperation with ruthless precision. She stole their blankets, tainted their water, and left false signs of patrols closing in. Exhausted and terrified, the family abandoned safer shelters for exposed ones. Their morale collapsed under the invisible pressure. By the time Kate revealed herself, they were broken. Her journals describing what followed remain among the most disturbing documents in American history. She wrote of the education she gained from watching their hope erode, likening it to breaking wild horses or training stubborn dogs. She framed their suffering not as cruelty, but as proof of divine order, a punishment for daring to resist. She prolonged the ordeal for 3 days. David was killed first. Kate strangled the boy while forcing his parents to watch, using the child's death to torment them further. Sarah begged for her unborn child's life, but Kate wrote of her pleas with contempt, calling them evidence of weakness. On the 2nd day, Kate forced Isaiah to dig the graves for his wife and son. When he finished, she strangled him with the same rope she had used on David and left his body beside the shallow earth, calling it a monument to futility. Sarah, already frail and traumatized, lingered only a few hours after her husband's death. She died from a mixture of exhaustion, dehydration, and despair. When the bodies were discovered, even Henrico authorities could no longer deny the truth. This was no coincidence, no isolated violence. A predator was at work. 3 more lives had been taken, including a pregnant woman and a child. Fear rippled across the county. Plantation owners demanded action, fearing rebellion and chaos. Among the enslaved, whispers spread like wildfire. They spoke of a white demon haunting the forests, a monster more terrifying than patrols or chains, waiting in the shadows between Virginia and freedom. Constable James Whitfield, aware that his reputation now hung in the balance, finally announced what he called a comprehensive investigation. Search parties were organized to comb the forests where bodies had been found. Witnesses were questioned. A modest reward was posted for information leading to the killer's capture. But from the beginning, his investigation was doomed, and Kate knew it. First, the effort was crippled by the same prejudice that had delayed action in the first place. To most whites in Henrico County, escaped slaves were criminals who deserved whatever fate awaited them. Few sympathized with the victims, and even fewer wanted scarce resources spent to avenge them. Some even whispered approval, claiming the murders were fitting punishment for slaves who dared to flee. Second, Kate had chosen her hunting grounds with terrifying brilliance. The forests she prowled were vast, tangled and unfamiliar to nearly everyone but her. Search parties could scour the area for weeks without finding the trails, dens, and hidden vantage points she had memorized over years of wandering. From her concealed posts, Kate could watch the hunters pass by, unseen, always one step ahead, and finally, perhaps her greatest protection, no one believed a woman could be capable of such savagery. The murders required brute strength and relentless stamina. The assumption that the killer must be male excluded Kate before suspicion ever had a chance to fall on her. Kate understood these advantages, and she gloried in them. Her journal entries from this period radiate confidence. She no longer spoke of vengeance for Thomas. Now she described murder as her calling, her vocation, the purpose for which she was born. By late summer of 1801, her killings accelerated. Her victims included Abraham, a blacksmith who had escaped from Richmond, twin brothers Matthew and Mark from Charles City County, and Ruth, an elderly woman traveling alone, desperate to reach the safety of free blacks in Pennsylvania. Each death displayed refinements in her technique. She learned to prolong the terror before the final act, turning fear into a weapon more devastating than violence itself. She also began taking trophies, scraps of clothing, small possessions, even pieces of her victims' bodies, which she stored in a hidden cellar beneath her home. Hours were spent arranging and rearranging these grisly relics, reliving her triumphs. Her journals from these nights reveal a mind sinking fully into evil, where murder was no longer crime, but art. By October 1801, Kate had killed at least 12 fugitives. Whispers of the white demon spread through the Underground Railroad like wildfire. Conductors altered routes to avoid Henrico County. Some escape attempts were abandoned altogether. For Kate, this was not discouragement. It was exhilaration. She expanded her hunting range, roaming further from her land, devising new strategies to stalk prey in unfamiliar woods. Her murders became theater. She staged bodies for maximum impact, crafting scenes designed to terrify anyone who found them. Hanging from trees became her grisly signature. Her 13th victim, Charity, a young woman from Petersburg, was discovered suspended upside down from an oak, her throat slashed so deep her head was nearly severed. It was an act requiring enormous strength, but more than that, it revealed a taste for spectacle. Kate wanted her message understood. This was not mere killing. This was domination by something beyond ordinary human evil. The effect was immediate. Stories spread among the enslaved like poison in the bloodstream. Some claimed the demon could track her prey by scent. Others whispered she moved through forests without making a sound, feeding on fear before striking the fatal blow. Kate's own journals confirm her delight. She savored the myths, the terror, the legends forming around her name. She no longer saw herself as a woman at all, but as a force of nature, punishment incarnate. With winter came new challenges, and Kate adapted with her usual cold precision. Snow betrayed the tracks of her prey but threatened to reveal her own. She fashioned modified shoes to spread her weight, leaving prints that resembled animal tracks. She studied how winter altered fugitive behavior, the need for fires that betrayed camps, the disturbed snow around shelters, the debris of desperate travel. Every weakness was another opportunity. On Christmas Day, 1801, while planters across Virginia feasted and drank in false security, a man named Ezekiel slipped away from a plantation in Hanover County. For him, it was the chance of freedom. For Kate, it was the beginning of her 14th kill. Ezekiel's mistake was choosing shelter in an abandoned tobacco barn, a structure Kate had been watching for weeks. She knew its sturdy frame and isolation would make it irresistible to fugitives desperate to escape the bitter winter cold. He had been inside less than 3 hours when Kate arrived, slipping through the pre-dawn darkness with her trademark silence. She didn't confront him directly. Instead, she barred the doors from the outside, trapping him within. Then the torment began. For nearly 8 hours, Kate toyed with him, scratching along the wooden walls, making guttural, inhuman noises, and allowing only fleeting glimpses of her massive silhouette through cracks in the boards. Each appearance broke him down further, destroying his hope piece by piece. Her journal describes this process as instructional, punishment as lesson. Ezekiel, she wrote, needed to understand the consequences of rebellion before he could be allowed the final mercy of death. By the time she entered, he was reduced to a broken shell, babbling incoherently, incapable of resistance. Kate strangled him with mechanical efficiency, then staged his body for maximum horror. When he was discovered 3 days later, his corpse hung from the barn's central beam, suspended by a noose fashioned from his own clothes. Ezekiel's death forced the authorities' hand. Constable Whitfield, facing mounting outrage from plantation owners and political pressure from Richmond, could no longer downplay the murders. Even Governor James Monroe was alerted, fearing that the killings represented more than isolated violence, that they hinted at a breakdown of order itself. Monroe authorized military involvement. A company of 20 militiamen, led by Captain Robert Hayes, was dispatched to Henrico County. These were seasoned woodsmen and Indian fighters, skilled trackers meant to succeed where local lawmen had failed. But Kate was not afraid. She watched their arrival from the shadows with interest, even contempt. In her journals, she mocked them, men blundering through unfamiliar woods, chasing a phantom they assumed must be male. Meanwhile, she maintained her flawless disguise, the grieving widow who attended church and conducted her affairs quietly. The militia scoured the forests for 6 weeks, but Kate always stayed ahead. She knew every stream, every thicket, every hidden ridge. Where they searched blindly, she maneuvered with surgical precision. Worse still, their presence drove fugitives off their usual routes and into areas she controlled more completely. The hunters had become her unwitting helpers. It was during this time that she claimed her 15th victim, Patience, a teenage girl separated from her group while fleeing militia patrols. Terrified and disoriented, Patience stumbled into a cave Kate had long prepared as a trap. What followed marked a new descent into cruelty. Kate kept the girl alive for nearly a week, using her as bait. Patience's desperate cries lured 2 more fugitives into the cave, both of whom Kate killed. When the militia finally stumbled upon the scene, they were confronted with a tableau so grotesque it stunned even hardened soldiers. 3 bodies were arranged to appear as though they had died defending one another. But the evidence of prolonged torture, the deliberate staging, it revealed a predator whose savagery defied human comprehension. Captain Hayes, in his official report to Governor Monroe, described the killings as proof of a depravity so profound it challenges belief in the killer's humanity. Yet despite their efforts, the militia caught nothing. After 6 fruitless weeks, Hayes withdrew, privately admitting that the unknown killer possessed terrain knowledge and tracking skill beyond anything his men could match. He suggested bringing in local civilian trackers, but the state refused. For Kate, it was a triumph. Not only had she outlasted the militia, she had thrived in their presence, bending their search to her advantage. The failure confirmed her growing sense of invincibility. In her mind, she was no longer bound by human limits. She was a predator perfected by her environment. When spring arrived in 1802, the forests once again filled with fugitives. Warmer weather encouraged escape attempts, and many believed, falsely, that the militia's presence had eliminated the killer. Kate saw opportunity everywhere. The stories whispered among the enslaved had taken on the power of folklore. The white demon, they said, could take any form. It could appear in 2 places at once. It did not merely kill men, it devoured souls. Kate fueled these terrors by staging her scenes with theatrical cruelty, arranging bodies in patterns meant to suggest ritual or otherworldly forces. Her 16th victim was Daniel, a blacksmith from New Kent County. His body was found crucified against a massive oak tree, railroad spikes driven through his hands and feet. The staging required enormous planning and brutal strength, proof that Kate had evolved beyond opportunistic killing. She was now an artist of death, creating spectacles meant not just to kill her prey, but to terrorize all who heard of it. Daniel's crucifixion was not improvised. Kate had spent weeks preparing, acquiring tools, studying his movements, and designing the murder site to deliver maximum psychological shock. The religious symbolism was deliberate, crafted to portray escaped slaves not merely as criminals, but as sinners marked for divine wrath. This was the beginning of what Kate privately called her theological period. Her journals reveal a twisted theology, a fusion of warped Christianity, racial supremacy, and personal vengeance. In her mind, slavery was not just social order, and it was God's will. Whites were divinely appointed masters. Black people were created for bondage. Those who fled were not simply runaways. They were rebels against heaven itself. Their deaths, staged as sacred punishments, became offerings in her dark crusade. She no longer saw herself as a murderer or vigilante. She saw herself as chosen. Each killing was a religious ritual, a sacrifice meant to restore balance after her husband's death and the sin of slave rebellion. This conviction made her unstoppable because it transformed cruelty into holy duty. Her 17th victim was Miriam, a woman traveling with her 2 daughters. Kate tracked them for nearly 2 weeks, watching from the shadows. Then the torment began. Instead of direct attack, she seeded their path with biblical passages, Old Testament verses about rebellion, divine punishment, and God's wrath. Miriam, exhausted and terrified, interpreted these messages as proof that her escape defied God's will. Convinced she had sinned by seeking freedom, her faith broke her more effectively than chains ever could. Kate exploited this collapse with surgical precision. Her journals gloat over the discovery. Her faith is my weapon. Her God is my ally. The murders were staged as an elaborate religious tableau. Miriam and her daughters were found posed as if struck down by heaven itself, surrounded by burned scripture pages and religious artifacts arranged to mimic divine judgment. To the slave community, it was undeniable proof. Escaping slavery was not just dangerous, it was cursed. Panic spread. Escapees whispered that the demon in the woods was not only superhuman, but God-sent. Underground railroad conductors saw their work collapse as fear of divine punishment outweighed any hope of freedom. Entire routes were abandoned. Her 18th victim, Joseph, a teenage boy from Powhatan County, showed just how far Kate's methods had evolved. She stalked him for nearly a month, using sounds, symbols, and staged omens to convince him he was being hunted by demons. By the time she revealed herself, Joseph was so broken that he welcomed her as human relief, even knowing she meant death. Kate took satisfaction in his despair, taunting him with the revelation that she was not an angel, not a demon, but a chosen hand of God's justice. She killed him and staged his body in another crucifixion scene, layered with even more complex religious symbols, drawing from Baptist, Methodist, and Catholic traditions alike. It was a hybrid theology of horror, crafted entirely to justify her brutality. The sophistication of these staged murders alarmed Virginia's clergy. Ministers recognized the killer had deep biblical knowledge. Some preached against the violence, warning congregations that true Christianity demanded mercy. But many parishioners privately approved. Others whispered admiration for the killer's righteousness. Reverend Samuel Crawford, pastor of Henrico Methodist Church, the very church Kate attended every Sunday, admitted later he began to suspect the murderer was within his own flock. The biblical quotations were too precise, too literate to come from folk belief, and yet no one suspected Kate. To them, she was still the grieving widow, sitting silently in the pew, her head bowed in prayer. In reality, her mind had split into compartments so complete they defied comprehension. She could worship sincerely in the morning and slaughter ritualistically at night, without ever feeling contradiction. By the summer of 1802, Kate Bender had done what no lawman, no militia, no rebellion had ever accomplished. She had effectively shut down the Underground Railroad in central Virginia. She had terrorized the enslaved into paralysis, convinced them that even God was against their freedom, and woven a mythology so powerful that her legend multiplied her real body count. She had become the perfect predator, so perfectly adapted to her, prey and her environment that ordinary law seemed powerless to reach her, but perfection carries its own curse. And Kate was about to discover that even monsters have limits. Kate's reign of terror was so effective, so absolute, that it ultimately sowed the seeds of her own downfall. By late summer 1802, her killings had drawn attention far beyond Virginia. In Philadelphia, a group of free blacks led by Augustus Freeman, once an escaped slave himself, now a successful businessman and respected abolitionist, recognized that something extraordinary and deeply dangerous was happening in Henrico County. More than 30 confirmed murders in just 18 months. Dozens more disappearances. Fear spreading across the South, choking the Underground Railroad itself. Escape attempts were collapsing not only in Virginia, but as far south as the Carolinas and Georgia. Freeman understood what this meant. The killer in Virginia wasn't just a local menace. She was strangling one of the most important escape routes to freedom, working with Underground Railroad leaders, including the legendary Harriet Tubman, who had never lost a single soul under her care. Freeman developed a plan to succeed where law enforcement had failed. His strategy: fight Kate on her own terms. Freeman assembled a team of 8 men. Some were free blacks, others were escaped slaves who had survived their own harrowing flights north. Each brought a skill the mission required: expert trackers, intelligence gatherers trusted by slave communities, and combat veterans hardened by years of struggle. Together, they possessed something Kate's victims had never had: preparation. They arrived in Henrico County in early September, disguised as seasonal workers, blending in among the tobacco harvesters. Whites paid them little notice, but within the enslaved community whispers spread. Special men had come from the north, not to flee, but to hunt the demon who had haunted them for nearly 2 years. Freeman's investigation was unlike anything attempted before. His trackers read signs invisible to white searchers. Local slaves, too terrified to share information with constables, now spoke freely, providing details that filled in the missing pieces. Slowly, Freeman's team built a map of Kate's hunting grounds. A pattern emerged. Every murder fell within a circular territory, the center of which was the abandoned Bender plantation. Freeman scouted the property himself, slipping through shadows with the same stealth that had once carried him to freedom. What he saw confirmed his worst fears: smoke rising carefully from hidden fires, paths through the brush that had been recently traveled, supplies stockpiled with methodical precision, and then confirmation. On the 3rd night of surveillance, Freeman watched as Kate Bender herself emerged from the supposedly deserted house. Massive, pale-eyed, armed with coils of rope and metal tools whose purpose needed no imagination. She vanished into the woods with the quiet certainty of a predator at home in its own kingdom. The revelation stunned Freeman's team. They had expected a rogue slave catcher, perhaps a deranged man, but a white widow, a woman orchestrating a campaign of cruelty so vast and systematic, it forced them to reconsider everything they thought they knew. For 3 nights, Freeman studied her with military precision. He watched her hunt. He measured her patience. He noted her terrifying skill. But he also spotted flaws. She had grown overconfident. Her methods, though devastating, had fallen into predictable patterns. She was blind to one possibility: that someone might turn her own tactics against her. Freeman's plan reflected the Underground Railroad's finest clandestine traditions. They would not confront her directly on ground she controlled. Instead, they would use her instincts against her, bait her into a trap of their own design. The plan hinged on deception. One team member, Samuel, would act as bait, posing as the perfect target. A young, healthy male traveling alone along a route Kate was known to patrol. His signs: broken branches, disturbed soil, subtle traces of passage, were carefully staged to appear genuine. But this time, the fugitive would not be helpless. This time, the hunter was walking into an ambush. On the night of September 23rd, Samuel set out from a point 10 miles south of the Bender property. For 2 days, he moved with calculated care, leaving the exact trail Kate would expect to find. And she did. Her journals from this period drip with anticipation. She believed she had found an ideal quarry, strong, young, and alone. She began her ritual of extended observation, following the fugitive with predatory patience. But for the first time in nearly 2 years, she wasn't the only one watching. Hidden in the undergrowth, perched in trees, and stationed along her every likely path, Freeman's team lay in wait, turning the forest into a stage where predator and prey were about to trade places. The deadly game of hunter and hunted stretched on for nearly a week. Kate shadowed Samuel with predatory patience, convinced she was closing in on her 19th victim. All the while, Freeman's team shadowed them both, tracking every movement with silent precision. Samuel played his role flawlessly, cautious, desperate, just careless enough to seem authentic. Each step drew Kate closer to the carefully chosen ambush site beside Mill Creek, 5 miles southeast of the Bender plantation. Kate's own journals from this time reveal her mounting excitement. She believed she was preparing for her grandest display yet. A murder staged with such elaborate theological symbolism, it would shatter what little remained of the Underground Railroad in Virginia. Her arrogance had swelled into megalomania. To her, this was routine, just another ritual kill. But the predator was walking straight into the snare. Freeman had selected the site with military care. Dense undergrowth for concealment, multiple escape routes for his men, and limited options for Kate. Samuel camped in the open clearing, a small fire burning, his posture mimicking exhaustion and misplaced relief. To Kate's practiced eye, he was perfect prey. What she didn't see were the 7 armed men surrounding the clearing, rifles leveled, each with a clear line of fire. Freeman himself watched from a vantage point, ready to command. Just before dawn on September 29th, Kate struck. She burst from the tree line with terrifying speed, her massive hands reaching for Samuel's throat. The same move that had claimed more than 30 lives before. But Samuel wasn't helpless. With a twist, he slipped free and shouted the signal. 7 rifles thundered as one. The volley ripped into Kate's body, musket balls tearing through chest, arm, and thigh. She crashed to the ground, bleeding, broken. Any ordinary person would have died instantly. But Kate wasn't ordinary. Against all reason, she rose, staggering forward, blood streaming, her massive frame defying death itself. To Freeman's men, the sight was almost supernatural, proof of the legends that had grown around her. Could this monster even be killed? Freeman had anticipated it. Calmly, he stepped from concealment, pistol drawn and closed to within 10 feet. Kate's first words, forced through blood-frothed lips, were not pleas, but threats. She declared herself God's chosen instrument, vowed divine vengeance, and promised that her death would only inspire others to continue her holy work. Freeman's voice was steady, almost clinical. He identified himself as a representative of the Underground Railroad, informing her that her reign was over. Then he questioned her. For 30 agonizing minutes as her body failed but her mind remained sharp, Kate spoke. She confessed to murders no one had ever linked to her. She described her hunting methods, her rituals, her theology. She boasted of victims whose disappearances had been explained away by authorities. She showed no remorse, only pride. Her final words were instructions. She told Freeman exactly where to find the cellar beneath her plantation, where she had stored the trophies of her crimes. She wanted them remembered. She wanted history to know, and with a final rasp, she claimed satisfaction, that she had avenged her husband's death 100-fold. When Freeman's men searched the Bender property, the horror was worse than imagined. Beneath the house, in a hidden cellar, they found her collection. Clothing scraps, personal trinkets, and preserved body parts. Evidence of at least 43 murders, nearly double what had been suspected. Each item was labeled, catalogued, arranged with obsessive care. And then there were her journals. Page after page revealed the descent, from grieving widow to predator to holy executioner. Each entry cold, methodical, weaving together perverse theology and clinical cruelty until mass murder no longer seemed to her a crime, but a sacred duty. The reign of Kate Bender had ended, but the darkness she left behind would linger for generations. The final entries in Kate Bender's journal, written only days before her death, revealed her ultimate ambition. She planned to expand her hunting grounds far beyond Henrico County, and even fantasized about recruiting other whites to join her in what she called a sacred mission, the eradication of slave rebellion across Virginia. For 3 days after the ambush, Freeman's team cataloged every piece of evidence. They gathered her journals, mapped her hunting routes, and used her own notes to uncover graves and hidden sites no one had ever found before. By the time their search ended, the confirmed body count had reached 47. Men, women, children, entire families, their ages spanning from 8 to 63. Kate Bender's reign of terror placed her among the most prolific serial killers in American history. The details were almost too horrific to comprehend. Victims tortured with psychological cruelty before death, murders staged with chilling religious symbolism, and journals filled with a predator's satisfaction at breaking her prey. Her crimes defied the imagination of her era. Freeman's report was shared across the Underground Railroad network and abolitionist circles. It served as both a warning and a manual, describing Kate's methods, the traps she used, and tactical advice to avoid bounty hunters or sadists who might imitate her techniques. Yet the greatest impact wasn't tactical, it was psychological. For nearly 2 years, the demon of Henrico County had seemed unstoppable, almost supernatural. Her downfall proved otherwise. Careful planning, coordination, and courage had destroyed the myth of her invincibility. Her massive frame, the same hands that had strangled 47 souls, finally lay still in the Virginia dirt. Freeman's men buried her in an unmarked grave, deep in the same forest she once claimed as her domain. No headstone, no legacy, just silence. The Bender plantation was abandoned soon after, its walls swallowed by vines and decay. Within a decade, the house and barns had crumbled, leaving nothing but whispers of what once lurked there. Official records told a different story. Constable Whitfield filed vague reports suggesting the killer had disappeared or died of natural causes. The truth, that Kate Bender had been exposed and executed by Underground Railroad operatives, remained secret, known only to a select few. Yet her shadow lingered. Escape routes through central Virginia stayed abandoned for years. Stories of the White Demon persisted long after her death, passed from slave quarters to plantations, leaving scars far deeper than her physical victims. And so, the horror of Henrico County ended not with a trial or a monument, but with silence. But what do we take from this story? Kate Bender was not born a monster. She was shaped by a system built on dehumanization, by personal grief she let consume her, and by a society that ignored brutality when it served its interests. She wore the mask of respectability, attending church, greeting neighbors, conducting business, while plotting horrors in the dark. Her story forces us to confront an unsettling truth. Evil often hides in plain sight. It doesn't always appear as madness. Sometimes it smiles politely, shakes your hand, and prays on Sunday morning. And once society strips away the humanity of others, there are no limits to the cruelty that can be justified. The mystery of Kate Bender reminds us that the line between civilization and barbarity is thinner than we care to admit. Within every human heart exists the potential for good and for extraordinary evil. The choices made in moments of power and crisis reveal who we truly are. So I ask you, do you believe Kate's entire story was uncovered? Or do darker secrets still lie buried beneath Virginia's forests? If this tale chilled you, share it with someone who loves historical mysteries. Hit the like button, subscribe, and join us as we uncover more forgotten horrors from the past. Because history still hides shadows, and some of them are waiting to be told.